Frog number 133 is Chris Flannery. Chris was born in Cowra in country New South Wales and moved to the Sunshine Coast at the age of 10, where he played his junior football with the Kawana Dolphins. Chris made his NRL debut for the Sydney Roosters in 2000 and was a member of the Premiership winning side of 2002, scoring a try in the 30-8 grand final win over the Warriors. Chris made his Origin debut for Queensland in Game 2 of the 2002 season and in all played 10 games for the Maroons. Further success followed Chris when he joined St Helens in the English Super League, where he finished his playing career. Returning to Queensland after the 2012 Super League season, Chris moved into the CEO role at the Sunshine Coast Falcons. In 2023, Chris was inducted into the Sunshine Coast Sport Hall of Fame. Well, Chris Flannery, thanks so much for joining us. What does it mean to you to be a FOG?
Yeah, obviously it's a great honour, when you look back and, you got the opportunity to represent your state, represent your family, your friends. It's definitely something you look back on, and I'm sure as we get older, or as I get older and my kids get older, and it's just something that you probably cherish even more the older you get and the further you get away from your rugby league career and as you go on in life, I guess. But yeah, at the top, it's a tremendous honour and, something that's a privilege to do.
Well, let's go back to the start. Like a lot of our FOGs, you're a regional boy. Grew up or born in country New South Wales in the town of Cowra, moving to the Sunshine Coast at the age of 10. Tell us about your early years in Cowra, out in the bush.
Yeah, obviously, very, very rural out in Cowra there. A lot different to the climate up here in beautiful Queensland and Sunshine Coast. But yeah, we grew up sort of in town, and mum and dad, mum worked at the local doctors as a receptionist, and dad had a couple of different jobs, I guess. He was a grain handler, and then he was building water tanks, and yeah, probably just got to one point where I think, he'd sort of had enough of working down there in Cowra and in the cold, and our family, or some of our family members, had sort of moved up to Queensland, and I know that they'd been thinking about it for a little while and decided to make the move.
Okay, so that was the trigger. What are your memories then of growing up on the Sunshine Coast and playing footy at Kiwana?
Yeah, obviously it was a lot different to Cowra. In Cowra we were in boots from the age of 5. So when we got up to the Sunshine Coast, there was not many kids playing in boots because the weather was so good. So everyone was playing in barefoot when we first arrived. But we went to the Kawana Dolphins, and they were a pretty small club on the coast at that time. But now they're a powerhouse on the Sunshine Coast in the juniors. But yeah, we signed up with the Kawana Dolphins and had a great 7 or 8 years there before I managed to get signed by the Roosters.
When did it get serious for you?
So I think I was about 12 years old when it started to get serious. I made a Sunshine Coast schoolboys team, and they took us up to Nambour and put us on a train overnight out to Longreach. So it was a huge, trip to go out to Longreach, and we got out there and we got billeted, and you think about it these days and it just wouldn't happen. But yeah, it was obviously we had our coaching staff and everyone on the train with us out to Longreach, but it was a big trip. And yeah, I remember thinking at that stage that there were some really good players. I had a good mate of mine, Casey Maguire, who I was playing with at Kiwana at the time, and there was guys from Redcliffe, Sam Obst, and a couple other guys who I later played NRL with. But that was sort of when it started getting a little bit serious, and I was thinking this is something that I want to do.
And how did you come to the attention of the Sydney Roosters?
So I was originally, when I was 15, I signed with the South Queensland Crushers. So I got a contract with the Crushers through Paul Bunn, the recruitment manager at the time, and Bunny took us down there, and there was quite a few of us. There was myself, Casey Maguire and Ben Ross, who were all signed with the Crushers, and we were all Sunshine Coast boys. And they obviously only lasted a year or two, and I was about 16 when they folded, I think. And I'd been talking to Arthur Beetson, over that period, and he'd watched me play plenty of times at carnivals, and I made the Queensland under-17s team, and we played down at the Sydney Football Stadium. And I think it was after that game, Beetson or Artie said to me, would you be keen on coming down to the Roosters, and we're keen to get you down here. And, it sort of escalated from there. We had a couple of different conversations with the Broncos and also with Parramatta, but after talking to Artie and, looking around the Roosters facilities, and at the time I was a super keen surfer. I'd surf every day. I probably wanted to surf more than I wanted to play rugby league. So, and the Roosters knew that. So in our meeting, they brought in a couple of pro surfers who were from Sydney, and they really looked after me and showed me all the beaches, and Bronny Beach and Bondi Beach and Maroubra, and I think it was more the surf spots down there that sort of swayed me. But yeah, obviously it was a great club. Gus Gould was there, and Freddie Fittler and Brian Fletcher and Luke Ricketson. There was a really good crop of sort of older guys there, but they had some really good young guys sort of coming through as well. And also got a job working at the club, so that was probably another bonus in signing with the Roosters.
Looking back, obviously one of the biggest decisions of your life to head to the Sydney Roosters. We'll get to why it was so important in a moment, but how big a move was it going from the Sunshine Coast to Bondi Junction, the Roosters? We're talking about one of the biggest clubs in the competition and one of the busiest and one of the places in Sydney to be. How big was it going from where you were to Sydney?
Yeah, it was a huge move. Obviously, as an 18-year-old, you're at mum and dad's, and washing's getting done, and your meals are cooked, and everything's going well, and you're living on the beach up there. We're only a couple of 100 metres from the beach, and surfing every day and playing a bit of footy. But yeah, it was a big move to go down there on your own, and Dad and I took the drive down there, and Dad stayed down for a couple of days before he came back to the Sunshine Coast. Probably had to get back for work, I'd say. And yeah, it was it was a tough day. I still remember it when dropping Dad at the airport down there, and I was staying with a family of the Roosters, so we're in Bronte, nice and close to the beach again. But when you sort of put Dad on the plane, and I'd already said bye to Mum and my brother and sister sort of. When we drove down. So, yeah, huge move. And I still remember, I think it was the service station just before we got to Sydney, and Clinton Tchaikovsky was getting out of his car, and he was obviously a few years older than us, but I still remember seeing Choc at the service station as we were coming into Sydney, and obviously played football with him later on. But yeah, it was a tough little time, but it was something you had to do. I obviously adapted fairly quickly.
Were there any times where you felt like that you couldn't survive and that you would wanted to go home? Were there tough times like that?
Oh, there's certainly times when you're a little bit homesick. The Roosters really looked after you down there, and I very quickly, gelled with a lot of the players that were down there. There was players from Queensland down there who I sort of knew, and there was just a really good group of young guys. Went straight into obviously under-19s playing for the Roosters jersey flag down there. So straight away, you had sort of 30 or 40 mates, and we're all on the same, timeline, and wanted to do the same things and be the best that we could. And we trained hard, but that was probably the best thing. Obviously, going straight into that team environment. And, there were certainly some days or weeks when you were homesick and you didn't have the mobile phone that you've got now. You had to sort of wait for the phone in the lounge room if you wanted to call Mum and Dad, or if they wanted to call you. So it was. There was another guy, Max Johnson, who was also living at the house, and he was from Atherton up in northern Queensland, and so we sort of stuck together a bit. And it was some pretty tough times at the start.
Did it help the fact the club was in a really good period there, as you mentioned earlier, with Phil Gould, premierships and more success was to come? Did that help?
Yeah, that certainly helps. Yeah, being in a strong club and having some great leaders there at the Roosters at the time. I think what also helped me was I went into an administration traineeship in the club and in the office, and so very quickly I sort of got to meet from the CEO, the football managers. Gus was obviously there, and the players would come in quite regularly, the first grade players. So I sort of built that relationship with everyone within the club, and there's still things I learnt back then now that I even use in my CEO role at the Falcons today. But it certainly set that platform for, getting ingrained in the club and knowing what everyone did within the club. I think that was probably, the best thing. And, I felt pretty comfortable, very quickly within the Roosters club.
Well, you made your debut in the NRL in 2000, played 2 games in the back half of the season. What do you remember of that first game against the West Tigers?
I remember my first run. I think to this day, I think the ball was stripped, but it was obviously a knock-on. So that was my first run in first grade. So probably, I'm sure the coach, Graham Murray at the time, wasn't very happy, but we did lose that game. I was out at Campbelltown. I got called in pretty late, actually. I was out there. I thought I was going to be 18th or 19th man, but I got called into the team the night before. Out at Campbelltown, so probably not the most beautiful place to make your debut, Campbelltown Stadium. But, we ended up getting beat in that game. But the second game, I played 5'8". Freddie was on Origin duty, and I got to play 5'8", and I scored in that game. I think it was against the Northern Eagles. So, managed to score a try in my second game, and I guess from there on, I sort of felt pretty comfortable within the first grade team, but still took a little while to sort of cement my place in there.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, the back end of the season, then the off season, and things started happening in 2001. Those 2 games, did that light a fire?
Certainly did, yeah. It just gave you the confidence to know that you could play at that level. Not that I'd set the world on fire when I'd played those 2 games, but I just knew that with a bit more hard work, another pre-season, that I was going to be in the mix in the following year to play a bit more regularly, and over 2001 and 2002 that certainly happened.
Well, 2002 was a massive year. What are your memories of that year, Premiership, Origin debut? How big a year was that?
It's probably, when you look back now, probably one of my best years in rugby league, obviously, to make your Origin debut. I think, and that was on my 22nd birthday, that Origin debut, and we got the win that night. And then to go on and sort of win the Premiership with the Roosters at the age of 22 was, something that you look back now, probably at the time I took it for granted a little bit. Not took it for granted, but it took a little while after a couple of losing grand finals after that to realise how special it was. I knew it was special, but when you look back now, I think it would have been great to go back and do it all over again.
When did you start thinking you might be a chance of playing for Queensland?
Oh, it certainly wasn't that year that I did make my debut. There'd been a few little whispers here and there that I might be a chance in 2002, but when the time came around to select that team, that was game 2, 2002, where I made my debut, and I definitely wasn't watching the TV or listening to the radio to see if my name was named. I think I was at a shopping centre in Bondi Junction when the team was named, and had quite a few missed calls, and it wasn't until my dad called me to let me know that I was actually in the team. So, it was not something I was keeping an eye on, but obviously it was great to be spoken about. But I was quite shocked when I did get the call up, and myself and Justin Hodges from the Roosters sort of both made our debut in that same game, which was great to do it with Hodjo.
Did you believe your dad? What was your reaction?
I was pretty shocked, and he'd only heard it on the radio, up here on the Sunshine Coast. So I had to make a few calls, but once I looked at the phone properly, and there was some voicemails and calls from the Roosters, coaches and staff, and it wasn't long before I realised that he wasn't mucking around. So it was a bit of a whirlwind from there. You start to get your head around, right, I'm in the Origin team, and then you come up to Queensland and you're in camp before you know it, and it's just a whirlwind, and pretty surreal at the time.
What was it like walking into camp?
Yeah, well, they flew the they flew the out-of-towners in, so the Sydney guys in first, so myself and Hodjo and I think a couple of other boys sort of flew up the night before, and the rest of the team wasn't coming in till the next day, so we sort of all had a few beers that night before, probably a few too many, and then the rest of the squad rolled in the next day, and that was when you you're like, right, you've got Alfie Langer here and Gordy Tallis and Shane Webke and Steve Price, and the list just went on. And when you're sitting there in the foyer and looking around at all the guys you're about to play footy with and train with, and it was just an amazing feeling to sort of be in that mix. And something to look back now, and again, probably I wish I'd sort of and not enjoyed it. We enjoyed it, certainly enjoyed it, but you'd like to go back and do it all again, I suppose.
The game itself, starting on the bench, was that good or bad?
Oh, look, it was probably good at the time. You got to soak in the atmosphere. We were playing at QE2, so it wasn't actually. It was Suncorp Stadium was under renovation at that time. So in 2002, we were at QE2. That's where I made my debut, and got to sort of soak in the atmosphere. I probably and during the week, Wayne Bennett had just said to me, he knew I could play anywhere in the backs or in the forwards, and he said, just be ready to sort of go on anywhere. So I'd sort of trained during the week. I'd done reps in virtually all positions, and there's probably only one position I didn't want to go on, and well, not that you're ever going to say no, but it was probably the wing. So, unfortunately, he took Hodjo off with about 10 or 15 minutes to go. So I sat on the bench for quite a while and ended up going onto the wing. But, it was all just once you got onto the field, the pace of the game was unbelievable. Felt like I just got out there and then it was all over. So I think Lottie Takiri scored 3 tries and sort of got us home in a win that night. And, it was, just the pace of the game is the thing that you notice the most.
It was the first of 10 games you played for Queensland. How long did it take you to acclimatise or realise that you belonged at that level?
Yeah, I certainly, in that first game, I probably didn't get enough of a feel for it. Obviously the pace. And then the following year, 2003, I think I only played game 1. I dislocated my shoulder in game 1, and then I was out for the rest of the Origin series. So I was still probably, getting to terms with it even when we got to 2004. And, I got to camp in 2004 and Michael Hagan came up to me and said, you're going to be playing in the number 6 jersey for this game. Darren Lockyer has fractured his rib yesterday or on the Sunday night, I think, in a game somewhere. So, that was pretty exciting, but pretty nerve-wracking at the same time, getting handed the Queensland number 6 jersey in your third game in 2004 and the games in Sydney. And, and number 6 wasn't my first choice position. I was probably playing more back row at that stage, second row. So, quite a daunting feeling, but excited but nervous at the same time.
I was going to ask you about that because looking through not only your Origin career, but your career in general, I think there's only maybe front row, hooker.
Yep.
You mentioned you played wing at Origin, maybe fullback, and who knows with 6 and 7 how you interchange. There weren't many positions that you didn't play at the elite level.
No, that's right. Well, coming through the Queensland schoolboys teams and those Queensland teams in the juniors, I was actually playing fullback. So the wing and fullback wasn't totally foreign to me, but I'd mainly played centres. I'd played centres all for club football, and then I played fullback in that 2002 final series. I actually played fullback because our fullback at the time, Luke Phillips, was injured up until the grand final. I think he had 10 needles just to play the grand final at fullback. So I'd played a fair bit of fullback, but I'd played all throughout the backs. And then I think it was in 2002, Gus Gould came up to me in the preseason. He said, I think you're an edge back rower. And that was when I sort of started playing more in the forwards. And probably from then on, from 2002 onwards was when I sort of really moved into the forwards. But obviously I shifted around a lot. I was probably more utility in some of those teams, and that certainly helped me get into those Origin teams and some of those teams with some pretty strong rosters.
Was that the biggest challenge of your career as you look back? You think game number 3 in Origin wearing the famous number 6 Queensland jersey?
Yeah, well, when I look back, and Scotty Prince was our halfback, and poor Scotty had some pretty big shoes to fill. He was carrying the team when he had me outside him at 6. But we went down to Sydney, and it was the first year that Golden Point was actually brought into State of Origin. So at the end of the game, I think it was 8-8 at the end of that 2004 game 1. So it went into Golden Point, which we'd never done before. Obviously, a couple of years earlier in 2002, we'd drawn the series and we got to retain the Shield. But, 2004, they brought in this Golden Point. So it was all pretty new to us. And, unfortunately, Sean Timmins kicked a field goal to beat us down there in Sydney in that game 2004.
You're also part of one of the most pivotal games in Origin history down in Melbourne, where Darren Lockyer scored the famous try that literally set Queensland on a path to unprecedented success. What are your memories of that time? Because the side was under the pump.
Yeah, it certainly were. Like I said, 2002, we got to retain the Shield. 3, 4, 5, we actually lost the series. So I don't think there'd have been any other teams that had sort of lost 4 series in a row at that time. So we were definitely on the pump. You could tell that the camp at that time, 2006, things, whereas in previous years there was a fair bit of mucking around and a fair bit of team bonding. This series was quite serious, and there was guys like Darren Lockyer and Steve Price and Petro Sivanasiva who were all under a fair bit of scrutiny from the media, and some of us guys who had played a few games at that stage, everyone was under the pump. So, there was a lot more pressure on us in that series, and we went down to Melbourne after a good win in Game 2. I think I didn't play in the Game 1 of 2006, but Brett Finch had kicked a field goal to sort of beat us in that first game, and we'd won Game 2 well, but going down to Melbourne for the third game, we had quite a few injuries. I remember GI was out, Justin Hodges was out, Billy Slater was out, and there was a fair bit of pressure on. I remember Fatty Vorton talking to us at some stage, and just about how important it was that we got the result of that series, and you could definitely tell that there was a lot of outside noise, and we just need to stick solid inside the Queensland walls. And 14-4, we were down with 10 minutes to go. And, obviously, as we know, the ball got swung out to Tatey, and Tatey scored that long-range try to sort of get us back in it, 14-10. And, then we kicked upfield, with probably about 5 minutes to go. And I was actually at marker, and Hodgson sort of threw that wayward pass, and Lockie scooped it up and scored under the post. And then we sort of held on after that, 16-14. So it was an amazing win. Even when I watch it now, sometimes you think, how do we get ourselves out of trouble here? And there'd been some really bad calls early in the game to sort of get New South Wales in front. So that was even worse to be down where we were at that stage, especially after some of the calls that we got. But and then obviously the boys, I didn't realise at the time, but that was my last State of Origin game, because the following year I went over to Super League about halfway through the year. In a trial in 2007, I broke my leg and ankle, and that was my last NRL game. And then I signed with St Helens in the Super League halfway through 2007. So I didn't get to play Origin again, so it was a pretty good way to go out. But obviously the boys went on a massive run after that, and I got to watch that from a distance.
I'll ask you about St Helens in a moment. I'll ask you a really unfair question now. And I know asking it is unfair. Can you compare winning a match like that and a series with Queensland to premiership success with the Roosters, or are they two totally different things?
Oh, look, I think they are totally different things. Obviously the premiership's something that you work all year with those guys, with that team, with that club, the coaches, the staff. So it's a year-long thing. You start training obviously in November, and hopefully you finish it off in October that following year. So that's a huge time to wait for the outcome that you want. But the State of Origin it's no less passionate, or you're just as happy to win the State of Origin series. And I felt like the Origin series is probably more for your family and your friends and your coaches who have sort of got you to that point, to because you couldn't do it without your family and your friends and those coaches that have helped you get to where you are. Like on Origin Day, I used to remember the amount of texts that you used to get, or that week leading into the game, and it was from guys or people that you hadn't spoke to for a long time, and some of your old coaches and some of your own teammates or schoolmates. It was amazing how many people would text you leading into that game, and you just knew that Origin, everyone was watching it. You know, everyone that you knew was sitting down, either at that game or they're watching it. And same as the grand final, I guess, but it's probably two different feelings, I'd say.
You mentioned heading to St Helens in 2007 after the bad injury. Was the decision to head to the UK based on that or wanting to do something different, or you didn't want to play against the Roosters? What was the mindset of heading to the UK?
Yeah, look, probably looking back now, I probably did go over a little bit earlier. I probably could have waited a few more years, but the injury, I broke my leg and ankle in a trial at the start of 2007, and it was sort of taking a little while to come good. The St Helens, who I'd sort of spoken to a couple of times about potentially going over there at some point, Daniel Anderson was the coach over there at the time, and they sort of came in with a 4-year offer to get me over, or 3.5 years, I think it was, to get me over there straight away. And a lot of our Roosters players who had sort of, we'd been there since 98 at the time, and a few of the, or a lot of the team at that stage was sort of moving on to different teams or different areas. And I just thought it was probably the time to make a change. And I had a couple of offers to stay over here in the NRL, but at the time it was a good offer to go over, and I always wanted to go and play in the Super League, so that was sort of why I went over there. And it was a strong club. They just won the World Club Challenge. The World Club Challenge, but they just won the Challenge Cup over there, it was a good move.
Well, you ended up playing more games for St Helens than you did for the Roosters. You enjoyed yourself over there. More grand finals, the 2008 Challenge Cup victory. Where does that sit on your list of achievements?
Yeah, certainly that's right up there as well. The Challenge Cup over there is, it's very prestigious. It's been around for a long time, and I didn't know a lot about it until I sort of got over there and just saw how passionate the supporters and the fans and everyone was about this Challenge Cup. And it's an amazing concept that works quite well over there. I'm not too sure how it would go over here, but it's certainly something that's, very traditional over there. And, you're playing at Wembley. I think we had 92 or 93,000 at Wembley for the Challenge Cup final, who we played against Hull FC. And, it was a great experience, and, something that, it's right up there with those grand finals and State of Origin wins.
Well, you played in 7 grand finals. Unfortunately, I hate to bring this up, Chris, but losing 6 of them. How does that sit now when you retire? You've obviously won the 1, so that helps overcome losing 6. But how did you cope with that?
Yeah, I don't think you'll ever overcome that, losing those 2 NRL ones, obviously, 2003 and 2004 were tough. And then it was just phenomenal over in the Super League. We obviously made 4 in a row and lost them at Old Trafford. It was just wasn't our night, and it was tough to, when you look back now, that's probably why I say, I wished I really enjoyed that first one that we got, and I thought, how good's this? It's first grand final and we've got to win, but there's good players that don't get to play in any grand final, so it's something that win is something that I certainly look back with fond memories, but tough to look back on those losses, that's for sure.
Well, that sort of encapsulates your career as a player, but still involved with rugby league. How important, looking back now, that time at the Roosters where you mentioned earlier you did that course, that studying, which enabled you now to be the CEO of the Sunshine Coast Falcons. That decision then to do that course set you up for life after footy.
Yeah, I think obviously that, there's a lot of things that have changed, obviously with our computers, a lot of social media and everything that's obviously changed from those days when I was at the Roosters. But there's still some fundamentals that I learnt back at that stage from some of the CEOs at the Roosters and the coaches and the administration people that were there. So look, it definitely probably put me on the path to an administration career, which I wasn't always something that I was looking for. But when I got the opportunity up at the Falcons, over 10 years ago now, to sort of step into that role that probably wasn't as daunting as what it could have been if I hadn't done that traineeship back when I was 18 or 19. So, yeah, definitely something that has helped with the transition out of, rugby league. It's definitely a hard transition for players today or all the time to, go from their full-time playing careers into, their careers after rugby league. It's not easy, and but straight away you sort of lose your 30 or 40 mates, and obviously your support network of coaches and staff that are sort of there to bounce things off every day of your career. And to go into a job, your first job maybe at the age of 33 or 34 is fairly daunting at the time.
Sunshine Coast Sports Hall of Fame 2023. What did that mean to you?
Yeah, that was very special. Yeah, to go into that Hall of Fame up there. Obviously, some very good sports people from the Sunshine Coast. There's lots of Iron women, Iron men, rugby league players, and some great players up there. So to get inducted into that thing, into the Hall of Fame was very special for myself, but also the family and my parents and brothers and sisters. So yeah, very special.
It's for rugby league, not for surfing, that is it? Yeah.
For rugby league, unfortunately, but I would like to be inducted for surfing, but there was only one thing about that. I wasn't a very good surfer. So,
who had the biggest influence on your career?
I'm sure it was a lot of players, say probably my dad, from those early years, the training sessions that he was coaching most of my junior team. So he certainly instilled a lot of, I guess, good habits within, he played footy himself. So, just going to watch him and play footy and play A grade and, sitting on the sidelines watching him, probably that had the biggest influence over me. But definitely, when Ricky Stuart came to the Roosters, that was when Ricky got to the Roosters. At the time we were a very talented squad, but we probably just didn't have that hard edge that we needed, and Ricky definitely brought that. He, the 2002 pre-season was one of the toughest pre-seasons that I think any team would have ever done, and probably Ricky Stuart, just his competitive nature and just how much he wanted to win, it certainly rubbed off on the team and on myself, and everyone, just training hard, and that was probably the biggest thing. So probably those two guys, Dad and Ricky, were the biggest influences.
What do you reckon, Chris, that 12-year-old boy on the train to Longreach would think if one of his coaches there had said to him, mate, this is going to be the start of a journey that's going to take you to Sydney with the Premiership and Origin success with Queensland and success in the UK, over 250 plus games at the highest level. What do you reckon that 12-year-old kid would think sitting here now?
Yeah, I think he'd be pretty amazed. It did feel like that train went for that long. It felt like I was going to Sydney, but he'd be pretty amazed about the career. Even when you sort of sit down for things like this and you look back on some of those numbers and you look back on the guys that you got to play with and the teams you got to play in, and it's amazing to think that you can do those things, but. And that's what I say to a lot of the kids who are either playing for the Falcons or coming through the juniors at the Sunshine Coast. It wasn't that long ago when I was sitting up there, and you think it's a long way away, but if they knuckle down and train hard and commit to the journey, well, it's within everyone's grasp. So definitely pretty amazed.
Well, FOG number 133, Chris Flannery, thank you so much for your time and congratulations on a wonderful career.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching this episode of the FOGS Queenslander Podcast. If there's a FOG you want to hear from, leave a comment to let us know. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our videos.